here at Turner Dodge House. This is a very landmark tree, if you will, in Lansing. This is a European beech.
Yes.
It's not native.
Not a native tree.
The house was built here in 1858, and we think sometime shortly after that or thereabouts was when this tree was planted. So pretty significantly old tree. One of the things that we're trying to do in this show is talk about the different species of trees that we have and really highlighting the larger ones. And how many species of trees, I know you said you thought you had hundreds, over 200, but probably less than 400 different species of trees?
Yeah, that's correct. We probably have over 200 different varieties of trees growing in the Lansing area, either between our street trees or our park trees. And again, the goal there is diversity. Try to have a wide variety of different types of trees, which will, in the end, limit the amount of susceptibility we have to insect and disease problems.
Very good.
As well as giving everyone a nice variety of things to look at. And eventually, large historic specimens.
And so they do have similar traits when they're in the same family or similar styles, but yes, as you mentioned, and we have seen those streets where maybe back in the early days they were planted all with the same species and all at the same time, and therefore when they all passed, left your street wide open.
Kind of live, grow up, and then if, like we say, a disease or insect agent comes along, that may accelerate the process. So by having a different age range along the streets as well, that helps to promote longer diversity and better growth for the trees.
What are the characteristics of beech trees? Obviously I see the smooth bark, but any other characteristics that we need to know about?
Yeah, basically the biggest identification feature with a beech tree is the smooth gray bark. It has a very thin cork layer as opposed to some of our other trees like an oak or a walnut or even the ash we looked at the Muni Kircher field, which tends to be thicker and corkier. Other than the smooth bark of the tree, one other thing that the beech has is a long pointy winter bud. We call them winter buds because they're visible in the winter, but in actuality, after the tree puts on its new growth in the springtime, these buds develop, and that's actually where the new growth is going to come out next year in the spring. So the bud is very distinguished of those. We had mentioned before where the ash tree was an opposite growing tree. This is what we call an alternate growing tree, and you can see where the leaves kind of come off alternate sides from one another, not across from one another. And then lastly, just the nice smooth leaf surface, and the leaf vein kind of terminates in a tiny little point down at the edge of the base there, and that's typical of all beech trees.
We did a circumference of 19 feet, 11 inches, or 18 feet.
18 feet, 11 inches.
11 inches.
Almost 19 feet.
And then you had diameter at?
Diameter of 73 inches.
So
it is a two-stem tree, but the stems do grow very tightly together. And again, we're more interested in the size and the girth of the tree than a true lumber measurement out of the tree. Certainly with the branches coming off so low on it, there wouldn't be a whole lot of lumber value to it, but aesthetic value to what it brings to the garden here and the house, the historic house, is probably the main thing that we'd focus on.
Now we were talking about the color of it, and we did see some of that purple color in the leaves, but definitely more purple in the summer it seems than at this time of year, which we are at October 31st today here.
Yep.
So
yeah, this is a purple leaf variety of a beech, and typically when the leaves unfold in the springtime, they will be a bit more purplish, and then in through the summer months, that's more of its traditional summer coat color. As the fall approaches, it kind of loses that coloration. It'll go to somewhat of a green color, and then typically beech trees will go from a green color to kind of a brown or copper color for a fall color before they drop off. Now, not every leaf typically drops off of a beech tree. Sometimes they will cling to some of their leaves throughout the winter months. Not anything special, just the way the tree grows.
Now, you mentioned on this tree, even with how old it is, we are still seeing new growth on this tree. Talk about, I guess, how important that is and what it means when you're not seeing that on a tree of this.
Right. When you do have a large old tree, you do want to see a good, consistent amount of growth across the crown of the tree. The crown being the width of the branch is that's spread out to. One warning sign that a tree is in somewhat decline is when you start to see it dying from the top down. That usually means that there's some sort of imbalance between the roots below and the shoots above, and one or the other is kind of prohibiting it from growing. Here, we're not seeing that. We've got a nice big open lawn area for its roots to be growing in, and other than a few structural conditions with the tree, health-wise, the tree is in wonderful shape.
Now, if we wanted to kind of keep the seeds from this tree growing in perpetuity, is that possible, and how would you take these leaves and get them to root into new tree stock?
Well, you can germinate the seeds, and that would basically produce offspring of this tree, and that is something that we've looked into, so we can perhaps raise up some seedlings and distribute them to folks in the community to help say, well, I've got a granddaughter or a grandson of the beech tree at Turner Dodge House.
Excellent, excellent, very good. This year we've had, in 2016 here in the fall, we have had a lot longer season as far as leaves not dropping. Why is that? Is it all weather? Is it the number of frosts that we have? How is that?
It's a number of different things. The previous 3 summers were very good growing seasons for us, so that helped the trees to establish a good crown, a good set of leaves. It helped root system development. The springtime was a typical spring. We had nice wet weather. It warmed up gradually. Because of those things, the leaves have still held on, probably 2 weeks later than they typically would this time of year.
And now, in terms of species of trees that drop first, I think usually your walnuts are kind of near your first, and then your oaks are always, you're raking them in the spring.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. The honey locust, which we have a lot of trees planted around town, they're usually one of the first ones to drop their leaves, followed by
very
walnuts.
Small, usually yellow. Yeah. Okay.
The silver maple, which a lot of folks have, they will typically drop kind of early as well. And then, yeah, trees like the beech and oak, they cannot drop their leaves till come springtime. Though those leaves aren't functioning anymore, they don't detach completely from the twig, but they will break the connectivity between the moisture moving between the twig and the leaf. So.
Now, we call beech a hardwood tree. I know there's a lot of definitions of what are hardwoods and what are softwoods. Yep. Your definition, if you will, for people out there on what those are.
Yeah, basically, any tree is going to have a degree of hardness and softness to it. Certainly trees like oak, hickory, walnut, beech are going to be on the more harder, durable side of things. Trees such as poplars, willows, tree of heaven, those are going to be on the softer side of things. A lot of folks will draw a distinction between conifer trees and deciduous trees. Again, deciduous just meaning that it loses its leaves in the fall, winter time, whereas the evergreen trees retain their foliage or their needles year round. The old times, evergreen was considered a softwood. Everything with a leaf was considered hardwood. But, we build houses out of pine trees, so certainly the softwood doesn't apply to them. Their wood is, in fact, pretty durable.
I'm Brett Kaschinske of the Lansing Parks and Recreation Department, here today with Dominic Fucciolo, and it's interesting, Dominic's with our forestry department but also lived in Chicago.
Yep.
And today when we're filming some of this, Chicago is currently down 3-2 in the World Series, so we'll see how they turn out here, but
no worries. We got 2 games. We'll come back.
I wish you the best of luck with that. I am cheering for him. I am cheering for him for sure. So we are here today by an ash tree, and specifically, what type of ash tree is this? Green, white?
Predominantly in mid-Michigan, we have 2 types of species of ash. One is a green ash, one is a white ash. This happens to be a green ash. It is distinguished from the white ash in that it has a thicker, more corky bark. It also has kind of what we call a diamond pattern to the bark. The white ash has a little bit tighter and smoother bark. And because of that, when the emerald ash borer, which a lot of folks have probably heard of, hit the area, it favored the green ash over the white ash because of that corky bark. For some reason or another, it was more compatible for them to burrow into and lay their eggs in there and do their thing, which ultimately led to the destruction of the tree. But the white ash trees with that tighter bark wasn't so attractive to them.
Now obviously we had a lot of ash borer kill over the past few years. How many trees passed away, and then why are we here with this tree today, and how has it survived?
Basically around 2004, the emerald ash borer showed up in mid-Michigan in the Lansing area. We had about 6,000 green ash trees on our streets, growing between the curb and the sidewalk, and another couple thousand growing in our park system. And we had about 3,000 white ash trees as well. Today we only have a couple of hundred surviving white ash trees. The majority of those trees were killed off by the insect. As time went on, there was a insecticide that was developed which helped control the insect, and if you had a large valuable specimen tree, then you could use that insecticide on it to help keep and preserve the tree. And due to the size and the location of this tree, we chose to try to keep it around, and we've been treating it for several years now to help it fend off the borer.
Are we treating any other ash trees in the system?
We had another large green ash in Quinton Park, but unfortunately in the ice storm of 2013-14, we lost a good portion of one, and at that point the rest of the tree wasn't worth saving.
So here at Kircher Park, obviously this helps us in the evening time with the sun setting in the west, and the ability for here of the shortstop, third baseman, it obviously takes out some of that sun factor in the evenings. When we talk about a large tree, we just measured it. It's 12 feet 10 inches in circumference. What's the height of this tree? What do we estimate that as? And I know you took a look at that. And
yep, I measured this tree, and it had a height of about 55 feet, which in a forest situation, it would be probably much taller because it would be competing with other trees in growing space, but this one's somewhat fairly open grown, so it tends to put out a little bit more width than it would height year after year. But still, it's pretty decent height for a tree this size.
Now, let's talk a little bit about the leaf. We're here obviously in the fall, but you have a larger leaf with a bunch of smaller leaves, I guess, going off of that, or describe this. This is a little unique.
Yep. This is what we call a compound leaf. Basically, it means what you're looking at here is the entire leaf. These leaves that come off of this central stalk are what we call leaflets. So it's the leaflets that make up the compound leaf. A lot of our other trees would have a singular or a simple leaf, which means they would just have perhaps one leaf coming off of them. Another distinguishing feature to the ash tree is the fact that it has opposite branch arrangement, which means that the leaves as well as the branches come off opposite of one another. Again, a lot of our other trees in Michigan have what we would call an alternate arrangement, where you'd have maybe one leaf here, one there, progressing up along the branches and the leaves. So one of the few trees we have in the area with an opposite character.
So has this tree kind of survived? Is it still in danger? Is the ash borer always going to be around, or do we expect that to subside?
Well, the ash borer will always be around. As time goes on, we will develop natural controls, predatory insects which would feed on it and help to keep it in check. Also better treatments, maybe more cost-effective treatments, but there's unfortunately no eradicating it or getting rid of it completely. Again, with the ash, it's more of a prevention type treatment. You need to treat the tree once every 2 to 3 years with an insecticide that's injected into the trunk of the tree, and that insecticide moves up the trunk of the tree and provides protection from the borer boring into the tree.
And what kind of expense is involved with the insecticide for the tree?
Last we saw, it was probably about $15 to $18 per diameter inch. So again, figure
we're almost 50
times a 48-inch tree. It'd be quite costly.
Yeah. And obviously, those are the reasons then we can't treat every tree within the city.
Right, that, and it came upon us so quick that one day we were hearing about the ash borer in Detroit, and we thought we probably would have had 3 to 4 year lead time before it hit us. It came much quicker than that, and treatment options were few and far between at that point in time.
Now let's talk about the trees and the forestry, I guess, department in general. How many street trees do we have? It seems like I remember just shy of 50,000 street trees.
Yeah, we have about 42,000 street trees, trees that are growing between the curb and the sidewalk on the city property. And we try to have a variety of trees out there, so when something like the ash borer comes in, it doesn't wipe out everything, much like happened with the American elm trees when the Dutch elm disease hit. So a good variety of street trees helps to ward off different insect and diseases that may come along.
Yeah, and then that obviously doesn't include all of the trees that you're responsible in the parks, like this one is not in that 42,000 count.
Right. We've got around 116 parks, and in every one of our parks, from our biggest down to our smallest, we have trees in them. And unfortunately, we've yet to inventory the amount of those trees. Again, I would say it's probably threefold compared to our city's trees.
Well, just to give you an example, we have almost 600 acres of grass that we mow.
Yep.
We have over 2,000 acres of parkland. And so is the rest all trees? No, we have some parking lots, we have some buildings, we have some tennis courts or other facilities, but pretty much the other part of that, when you're not mowing 600 acres, the other portion, the overwhelming majority, is trees in our forested areas. So it is a big system to take care of, and we've got a lot more trees to highlight for you. At Turner Dodge here again, and we have behind us a tulip poplar, which we have a leaf here of it, and you can see a rather large leaf. And I planted one of these in my yard here a couple of years ago, and just a beautiful tree, big green leaf during the year. Obviously it has a yellow color now. Fast growing tree is what I know of when you talk poplar. It usually grows pretty fast.
That's true, but the common name is a little bit misleading. It's actually not a poplar or in the poplar family. It is called tulip poplar because at a distance the tree actually looks like one of our native trees, the cottonwood, which other folks will call or term a poplar, mostly due to the thick striated bark on it. And the distinguishing feature of the tulip poplar leaf-wise is it kind of looks a little bit like a maple tree, but you don't have that top lobe to it. It's what we call a truncated leaf. No other tree in our area has a leaf that looks like this. So whenever we were in tree identification class and we came up to a leaf like this, if you didn't know this one, you weren't very good as a forester. So pretty easy to identify by the leaf. In the springtime, the other half of its name, common name, tulip poplar, it'll have a flower, a white flower that will resemble a tulip. And the tree is actually in the magnolia family. A lot of folks don't know that because this is, quite a large striking tree, where most of the time a lot of our magnolias are more of a smaller ornamental sized tree.
This tree, or all our trees in this show, pretty large in
Yes.
terms of in the park system, and this tree is 11 feet 9 inches in circumference. And then you had a diameter of
44 inches.
44 inches. So and I'm not sure how tall it is. We'll have to get a measurement, but my guess is it's well over 60 feet here. So.
And originally, tulip poplars, when the Navy was primarily a mast sailing ship Navy, tulip poplar was prized for growing a tall central trunk, which they used for ship masts. This one here, growing kind of open grown on the Turner Dodge grounds, doesn't quite have that tall central stalk to it, but when they do grow in the wild, in the forest, typically they will get you a good straight trunk, and those were valued for ship making.
So is this native to this area?
The tulip tree is a native tree, and it will grow within its range here. You have to be careful what time of year you're planting them. You don't want to plant young nursery stock too late in the fall, where a frost can kind of get at it. Same in the spring. You want to give it a little chance to beat the spring and fall frosts.
Let's talk a little bit about tree planting and some of the tips, I guess, that you have, so that somebody eventually, for the next generations, can see trees this big. Because when you plant a tree, and it takes, for instance, in the 1800s, as we saw with the beech tree over there, you're really planting for future generations. So what are some of the tips that you would give folks for planting trees?
Well, a lot of folks ask us about the best time of year to plant a tree, and a simple answer is when the ground is thawed off enough to dig, you can plant the tree. So that would be any time from about March through November. Are there times of year where you're going to be more successful at planting a tree and having to provide a little less care to the tree and have a better chance of it establishing? Yes. And typically those times of year are going to be early to mid-spring, say about April to about mid-May, and into the fall, say mid-September to about the end of October.
And then in terms of, obviously you want it at level, and then I know you always talked about if you plant wood chips around at the beginning, that you make sure you don't do it in a volcano.
Right.
And more have it around the outside where water can go in, and then you don't have that mulch against the tree where insects can get in there.
Right, right. Yeah, you definitely want to look where the root collar begins on a tree, and a lot of times if you're buying a plant called Baldwin burlap plant, where it'll be, all tied up in a nice ball, you want to actually undo the top of that and dig down a little bit and look for that root collar where it begins, and that's the level you want to plant the tree at. Planting too shallow can create problems with surface roots. Planting too deep can eventually cause problems with trunk suffocation. So it is important to find that proper level to plant at. And again, you made an excellent point with the mulch. A lot of folks see the landscapers pile up the mulch on the trunk of the tree, and they think that protects the trunk of the tree, but in essence it retains moisture on that trunk of the tree, which can cause the tree some issues. So you want to start at the base of the tree with a very thin layer of mulch, and then work that out probably a foot or so, and then start to build up a little bit of a well on the outside. That does two things. Number one, it keeps the mulch away from the delicate young trunk of the tree, and number two, it kind of creates a shallow bowl which will help retain moisture while you're watering the tree.
And then obviously the other things, you really got to look up in the air at where you're planting, because
Absolutely.
What looks like a 1 or 2 inch caliper tulip poplar suddenly one day will be very large, and so you got to keep it away from the electrical lines. You got to keep it away from those structures above,
Street lights.
where it can run into interference there.
Yep. Yeah, there's a lot to be said about the right tree in the right place. And have we done everything perfect all along? No. Have we learned from our mistakes? Well, I hope so. But we look at the size of the planting space, what's around it, and what it will affect, and try to envision the mature size of that tree and try to put the right tree in the right spot.
Here on Delta River Drive with, at least my favorite is the oaks, because of the size that they get to. And we are here with a bur oak that we measured at how many feet around circumference?
It was 73 feet in diameter.
73
in diameter.
inches, yeah.
And the circumference of it was 19.1, I think.
Yeah,
it was.
19.1 in circumference, and then 73 in diameter. So extremely large tree. Talk a little bit about the bur oak, and why did this tree survive? You estimate it's over 200 in your estimation, years old.
If this tree isn't over 200 years old, I don't know what tree could possibly be with the size of the trunk like that. Chances are it escaped the lumbermen back in the day because it's got kind of a short, squat trunk. It wasn't probably attractive to the lumberman's axe and saw because it branched very low. Typically when they look at trees for harvesting, they want tall, straight trunks so they can get as many boards out of them as they want. Lucky for all of us today that this was one that they let us keep, let's say. So it is a lovely specimen of a bur oak. One of the easiest ways to tell a bur oak apart from some of the other oaks is that it kind of looks like a bass fiddle. The instrument that you would play has kind of a broad-headed top part of the leaf, and then at one point it will pinch down very close to the leaf vein and have a narrow point there, and very distinctive leaf with the bur oak. Another one kind of here with that same, similar kind of bass fiddle look to it. Oaks in general, there are two different large varieties of oak. There's basically your red oak group and your white oak group. The bur oak belongs in the white oak group. One of the distinguishing features of the white oak group is that they have rounded lobes. Lobe being this portion of the leaf here, which kind of sticks out, similar to your earlobe. But the white oak group, again, which the bur oak belongs, has rounded lobes. The red oak group will have pointed bristle tips. So in addition to the lobe not being rounded but pointed, there'll be a tiny little bristle tip that would come off the leaf. And that's the main distinction between identifying a red oak family group or a white oak family group.
This bur oak here is in the Delta River Drive, just south of Grand River here. So a massive oak tree that really spans several yards and properties, and even goes out into the middle of Delta River Drive here. A very impressive tree.
Yes. One thing I noticed is that the once upon a time when the power lines were laid out in this neighborhood, they actually jogged the power lines around this tree. So obviously this tree has been here well before the dawn of electricity, and it was good to see that they took that into consideration in preserving it.
Yeah. Now when the tree, whether it's a street tree or a park tree, kind of meets its demise, you need to remove it. Take us through that process. How does that work?
Well, we try to be as efficient with managing our tree waste as we possibly can. Most anything about the size of a telephone pole or smaller will get run through one of our brush chippers. They are making some pretty awesome machines these days to help chew up and process wood, and we're fortunate enough to have one that, again, we can put a fairly sizable chunk of wood in it, and in a matter of seconds grind it down into wood chips. Those wood chips are basically valued by the power industry. We have a contractor who hauls them out to a wood-burning power plant. So then those wood chips are basically used to burn and create electricity. As far as our larger diameter wood goes, we've got a contractor that we bring that to. They pay us a certain amount of money for that wood, and then they will either process it into firewood, or if there is a sizable, desirable log, they may run a metal detector over it to see if there's any objects in the tree, and they may actually turn that into a saw log. One of the biggest problems we have in urban areas is folks hanging or affixing things to trees, whether it's a nail or a screw from an old planter, whether it's a garage sale sign, those types of things. I've even seen where we've cut down trees and road gravel had actually been embedded in the bark of the tree, and the tree had grown over and past that. So you can imagine running into some of those things with a bandsaw trying to mill up lumber. It wouldn't be a good thing. But when there are some nice logs to try to salvage, we try to do that too.
How many trees in a typical year are you removing from either the right-of-ways or from the parks?
From our right-of-ways, when the ash borer hit, we were probably at an all-time high of removing anywhere from 1,200 to 1,500 trees a year. Back when I first started with the city, which was a couple of decades ago, our average removal list on the city was probably 200 to 300 trees. Currently we're a bit above that because we're still kind of feeling the effects of the ice storm we had a couple of years ago. So currently we're removing about somewhere around 500 trees a year. We are trying to replant those losses. Unfortunately, manpower and budget dollars kind of make that difficult, but we do our best to try to plant back a couple of hundred trees each year as well. In our park system, it ends up being kind of a hazard type management where we're trying to keep the dead trees to a minimum, and we typically remove 150 park trees a year.
And now I know there's also trimming involved, and for most of us, I think the average resident, it would be trimming those limbs up that are kind of getting low, that get in the way when you're mowing, or maybe over the sidewalk when you're trying to walk down the sidewalk. But then there's also dead wood that you're trying to remove out of trees for trimming. Talk a little bit about, obviously we talked about removals, but then also the trimming.
Right. Well, with any type of trimming, the first and foremost thing is have a purpose for that trimming. You don't just trim a tree for the sake of trimming a tree. You have to have an objective in mind. Our first objective, first and foremost, is safety. We are interested in trying to keep large, heavy objects that are growing at great heights in the sky from falling on us below. So hazard deadwood pruning is one of our main concerns. The next type of pruning that we would do would be what we call clearance pruning, and that would involve removing limbs that are beginning to interfere with traffic, the sidewalk,
street signs,
houses, things like that. Unfortunately, as our numbers have gone down, our ability to trim things have waned a little bit, but we hope to get on a rebound and begin to start getting back at it.
We're here with the Chinese elm, and this is on Clifton Avenue, just north of Mount Hope. Tell us a little bit of characteristics, I guess, about the Chinese elm. Obviously, we have a large tree here, but what are some of the characteristics of it?
Well, as the name suggests, it's not native to the United States, Chinese elm. It has the traditional vase shape towards the top.
Okay.
But once you get down here, it's totally different.
Yep.
That bark is, on an elm, would be more of parallel uprights. This is blotchy, quite colorful and picturesque, but quite a different species.
Now, you mentioned the trees that are native to Michigan and not native to Michigan. Your group measures all of them, correct?
In Michigan, we list them all. Nationals only accept those that are native.
Native,
yes.
Okay. In terms of this tree, the measurements that we just did there, explain what we were doing. We went up 4.5 feet, and then measured around. Explain a little bit about that.
Yeah, we have to have standards, of course. So it's 4.5 feet above ground level. That is the standard place for taking the measurements. And we simply run a tape around and come up with how many inches that is, and that is one of the factors. Height is another one of the factors, and as opposed to climbing each tree, which is not too practical, we use trigonometry.
You measured out 75 feet, and that's where you could get a clear look at the top of the tree here?
That is the base leg of the triangle for the trigonometry principles. That is entered into my phone app, and then I state the bottom of the tree with that distance and the top of the tree, and I get a direct readout as to what the tree height is.
This is a tree here that is what we call a city tree. It's in the right-of-way, which is between the sidewalk and the curb in almost all instances here. So this tree is really battling, as you can see, it's battling the Clifton here, it's battling the sidewalk, which was just redone there, but still a very beautiful tree that goes over all of the road and even reaches the other side, almost reaches the house in terms of its canopy here. So really an impressive tree, ranking high in terms of, in Michigan, the Chinese elm. It's not the top, but it's right up there.
It's number 4.
Number 4.
Yes.
So in terms of tree care for folks at home, what are the best things to do to care for your tree, whether it's in your backyard or here by the road?
A lot of concrete and a lot of pavement isn't good for it because a lot of moisture is not getting down to the base. Pruning limbs is okay. There are better seasons to do it and worse seasons to do it. Quite often homeowners might get into insect and disease control, which enables them to survive and reach a bigger size like this.
So do you want to do the trimming more in the dormant season, or what are best overall for trees for that?
I think overall it is the dormant season that is least damaging.
Yeah. Describe some of your interest in trees, your background, and really why these are important to you.
My career was totally with the Michigan Department of Natural Resources Forest Management Division, so I have a way back interest in trees and the woods, and my family has acquired the same tastes. When I retired, I continued to want to be involved in something to do with the woods. We got to looking at the Michigan Botanical Club's list of big trees and specifically went out to try to look at some of those. In the process, we got interested, saw that we could perhaps nominate some trees, do some measuring. My son and I as partners in this, and we volunteered to the Michigan Botanical Club, and they said we can certainly use more helpers, so here we are.
Awesome, awesome. So yeah, it is impressive looking. What do we think, if you could estimate, is an age of this Chinese elm here?
Those are always very difficult, and something everybody wants to know, and it so much depends on its history. But I would say that in general, a tree grows an inch every 3 to 5 years.
Okay.
In diameter.
Okay. So this would definitely be one that has been here, obviously, a long time and has been able to survive.
Yes.
All right, excellent. My name's Brett Kaschinske of the Lansing Parks and Recreation Department. I'm here today with Ted Rochelle, and we are here at Sycamore Driving Range, and this is the extreme south end of Sycamore Driving Range. We're right along the Sycamore Creek, and this continues our talk about trees within the city of Lansing, and especially talking about big trees. And Ted is here, part of the Michigan Big Tree Project. I like the shirt there.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about this white willow here behind us. Some of the stats on it, and maybe how old it is.
Well, this white willow was discovered by my son. We're biking on the trail just behind here, and once you get into this business, you're always looking left and right looking for another big tree. And he said, I think there's an especially big one back there. So we came around at a later time and checked it out, and it turns out to be not only the state champion white willow, but we are going to nominate it for a national champion white willow.
What are some of the characteristics, I guess, or some of the measurements that make it number one in the state of Michigan, and then obviously potentially for the national?
We use the same standards as the national folks, and there are 3 factors that go into the total score for a tree. One is the circumference at about 4.5 feet above the ground in inches.
Okay.
We add to that the height in feet, And the average crown spread, we take a quarter of that so that doesn't get overemphasized depending on whether it's open grown or in the woods.
Okay, and what are the measurements here of this tree right behind us, this white willow? It is pretty massive. I know it would take several people for us to go around and link arms.
In inches, it came out 389, so that is about 32 feet around, and it'd be 10 feet right straight through the center, so it's a big one.
Okay, and what are the factors that you need to do? You said you need to submit it to the national. You just write down the measurements and they go by that, or do they come out and inspect, or how does that work?
We write down the measurements and submit those on their standard form and send photos as well because they want to judge that indeed it is legitimate.
Yep.
And then they give us a report, and this one will be submitted here shortly, and before this year's out we should know whether they consider this a national champ or not.
Okay. We're here on the banks of the Sycamore Creek. Obviously we heard a lot of geese in there. Is this species here particularly able to adapt to the flooding that takes place here at the Sycamore driving range? Is that one of the reasons why this has survived?
Yeah, quite often cities do well in having a large number of big trees. One of the factors is it's been here a long time, it's had an opportunity. Quite often the competition around it is been suppressed.
Right.
It gets lots of room to spread out. And in the case of this particular species, it's quite adaptable, but it's one of the few that does well in a really wet area. You can see it's almost in the water here.
Right, right.
And, so that helps it do its best.
We know you usually see this in flooding areas, but in terms of maintaining this tree, it's pretty hardy in terms of when it gets cut, it regrows pretty fast. What are some other characteristics of the willow?
It's a sprouter, so you cut off a limb or cut off the base and it'll probably come back. And you can see a lot of that has been happening here where it naturally drops a limb and ones below it sprout out. We question whether this started out as a single tree or as a bunch of those sprouts. That will be a factor when we get to the nationals.
Okay.
They recently changed their rules from if it grew together, it's a tree, to if it started as multiple trees, it doesn't qualify.
And now how do you think you're going to be able to determine that? Obviously it's all conglomerated together here, but how would one determine that?
It's very difficult and it's a subject call. They have specialists that do that, but pretty much it's sighting down the stems and noting whether they come together above the ground or at the ground.
Okay.
So it's a judgment call.
Now, if folks wanted to see all the big trees, not only in Ingham County, which is kind of how I got introduced to Ted, he called us up and said that we have a potential national champion here. And then I went to your website and saw all the big trees in Ingham County and saw a lot of them in our park system. But what is the website and how do you get those trees listed if somebody thinks that they have one for your group?
They could go to the website and get the information either to the state coordinator, who's Andy Sawyer, or to myself. The Michigan sponsor is the Michigan Botanical Club. Each state has their own sponsor. That happens to be the one for Michigan.
Okay.
So they sponsor the Big Tree Project. They maintain the website. You go to mishbotclub.org.
Excellent, excellent. And I think you'll be amazed at how many, like I say, are around in the city of Lansing parks. There's some on roadsides. There's definitely a lot in Ingham County, but then a lot at MSU. And I know they pride themselves on the agriculture and the forestry. Why are there so many big trees for the state, those records at MSU?
Michigan State University and most big universities are really interested in their grounds, and they like to display a lot of special trees, special species that you don't see other places. Not long ago, someone at Michigan State made the effort to go around and catalog all their trees and put them on the register. So considering that there are many trees they have that aren't found anywhere else in Michigan, we see a preponderance of the big ones on their campus.
Yeah.
And they take good care of them there.
And I know they pride themselves too in tree diversity. I mean, we've talked on the show, we've been to the beech tree at Turner Dodge, an ash tree at Kircher. We've talked about oak tree on Tecumseh River, and now we're here with the willow. really at MSU you see that tree diversity as well, and we obviously know that that's important because if you have all ash trees or and there becomes a disease, it really wipes those out. We have also our forestry department, and we've had Dominic on here, and we are a Tree City, USA. We really pride ourselves on our forestry and our trees here, and this is just another special one of those here at Sycamore Driving Range. So we're here now in Mount Hope Cemetery, and this obviously was a cemetery that started well before the turn of the century here. And so we have a lot of older trees within the cemetery. And this is the first evergreen, I guess, that we are putting on the show here. Talk a little bit, Ted, if you will, about the Scotch pine that is behind me, characteristics of that.
Scotch pine is non-native, but it does very well in Michigan. And this one is currently the state champion at about 11 feet in circumference on the base. Probably the most identifiable characteristic of Scotch pine, as you look higher up, the bark is quite a bright orange. None of the other native species have that characteristic. The needles are on the short side. They occur two in a group, but that's not uncommon to some of the other Michigan species as well. So okay. I would look for that orange bark on the top.
Why do you think the trees survived well here at the cemetery right along? Again, we're just inside the entrance here, but what are the reasons for its survival? Obviously there's some competition for this one right here in amongst several trees.
In a place like this, probably when this tree started out, these younger trees were not here, so it got a nice jump start. At the cemetery, you probably do some fertilizing, you do some weed control, you're keeping the grass competition down. All of these things help a tree to do its best.
In terms of this tree now, obviously with its being evergreen, needles are on all year, but it loses some during the year. Is there a time that it loses more needles? I know folks that have these in their backyards may say, yeah, I know when it really loses more needles, but they are never all gone.
Right, and usually they hold their needles for 2 or 3 years, probably 3. Then that 4th year's needles will fall off in the fall, same time as the hardwood trees are losing their leaves. And quite often owners think that their tree is in trouble right then, but it's a natural process.
So every 4 years, basically, is when you're going to see a larger needle loss.
That 4th year's needles will occur, but it occurs every year.
Oh, okay.
New 4th year, yes.
Got it,
Yep.
Got it, understood. So yeah, here at Mount Hope Cemetery, obviously this is right along the Mason-Esker. It kind of starts up in Bancroft Park, and this is one of our hilliest sections, if you will, in terms of elevation here in Lansing. And it's also right along the Sycamore Creek. So we had the willow tree that was in the Sycamore driving range. We were just over on Clifton for the Chinese elm. And then we have several trees here within the cemetery that have been on the big tree list, and this being one of them. So we had the state champion willow. We know we have a state champion catalpa on the Capitol grounds. Here at Mount Hope, we have the pine tree, the Scotch pine. What are some of the other state champions that we have right here in Lansing?
We will take a look here in a moment at the spindle tree, which is a very small tree, but for its species, it's the champion.
Okay.
And then down, I believe it's called North Cemetery, is the champion white fir.
Okay, so yeah, several within obviously the city of Lansing, and again, I know MSU has a bunch too, so we're really blessed to have some of these state champions right here in this area. So if you haven't, go check out the big trees in Lansing, take a look and try and find those. They really are impressive, and also the variety of species that we do have here in Lansing, it is pretty massive. Trees are obviously a big part of our park system here. We've looked at several different species of trees. And Ted, I'd just like to thank you for all of your work, for coming out here today, educating us a little bit about the Big Tree program and the Big Tree project. So we're here at Evergreen Cemetery in Section C, and not really a massive tree here, but definitely big for its species. And let's talk a little bit about, first of all, the name of it, a spindle tree. What is that? And quite an odd name.
I don't know much more about it than that. It's the only spindle trees I'm aware of in the entire state. I'm sure there's more somewhere, but so this is kind of rare. And as you mentioned, it's not particularly big. It's 64 inches around, but for a spindle tree, that's big, and it tops the list.
Yeah, and I think here in Section C, I mean, as you can maybe see behind us here, we have several of these species. So we have number 1 and number 2 in the state, I think, right here. But there's other neat species of trees in here. Do you remember how you found these trees?
In part of our general searching around, as I mentioned before, cemeteries are a good place to find the big ones. And it's just a matter of wandering around and saying, that's an unusual looking tree. Is it something we should take note of? And eventually we identified it.
What are some of the best ways for folks at home to identify the tree that they may be questioning exactly what it is or what the species is?
There are several very good books in the bookstores for identifying tree species. And if it's a contender for maybe one of the largest of its kind, they can always call us and we'll come out and take a look.
Is it by taking a look at the leaf structure, all of the characteristics of it? What are some of the things to look for overall in trees?
Surprisingly, a lot of trees are easily identified in the middle of winter with no leaves.
Okay.
And yet the leaves are the best feature, the easiest one to work with. But the branching pattern, the bud style, there are just so many features that are unique, it's amazing.
We talked a little bit before about tree diversity within a park system, and why is that important to have a variety of trees?
One of the reasons you do it is interest, and a lot of flowering trees and shrubs. Another reason is, as we've seen with the American elm and with the ash trees, if a disease comes through, it wipes out your entire crop. So
Right.
This gives you a backup.
As far as planting, are people able to buy non-native species? Talk a little bit about native versus non-native, and should that even be planted?
Items that are for sale commercially have passed the inspection of some kind of an agency,
Okay.
and most of your planting companies, your seedling companies, carry a wide variety of non-native as well as native species.
So if you see them commercially, you're able to plant them, and we talked earlier about obviously depth and watering, but also about looking up and making sure that they have that ability to grow without power lines, etc. around them. Are there any other tips that you want to give folks as far as planting trees?
The main features that make a tree grow, of course, are sunlight and water and the nutrients. So rich soil, lack of competition, overhead space to grow, an area that's not particularly dry, those all help.
So again, if folks are interested in seeing some of these trees, we were just at Mount Hope Cemetery, just inside the entrance there, right along the Sycamore Creek. That's where we had the Scotch pine. Currently these spindle trees, and there's a few of them in here, are in the northwest corner of Section C, as in cat, at Evergreen Cemetery. So get out in the parks, take a look at these trees, and again, go to the website and figure out if you feel that that tree could be nominated for an award. Make sure you contact them. We appreciate it. Thank you.
You're most welcome. It's a great city.
I'm Brett Kaschinske with the Lansing Parks and Recreation Department, here today with Matt White of the facilities here at the Capitol. And we're here to talk about a special tree, which is the catalpa tree behind me. You see the beautiful white flowers there, and then you'll see some efforts that you guys have taken to make sure that this tree gets preserved. Talk a little bit about the efforts there.
Well, the tree's been here since about when the Capitol was built, in 1879. Early photos show the catalpa. It had two catalpa trees, one on this side of the sidewalk, one on the north side of the sidewalk. There was two originally. This is the surviving one, and it was the national grand champion catalpa tree, one of the largest in the country, and it got displaced a few years back, but we're still pretty proud of it. It's one of the largest ones in Michigan. We have a fence around it to kind of protect it, keep the kids off it, and then we had to add some supports back in the 90s to help give it a little more support. There's some cross bracing in the tree itself to keep the limbs tighter. We were afraid of losing it, so MSU played a big part. Forestry Division, Dr. Jim Cabasso from the Forestry Division came out and really gave us some good pointers on how to preserve the tree. So we've been babying it ever since, and they're still pretty active with us now as we currently speak in helping us preserve the tree and the legacy of the tree.
I know we have talked about the beans on there, or the seeds, and I know there's an active effort for those seeds to be used, and you mentioned the partnership with MSU. Talk a little bit about those trees that have come out of that and where they have gone in Michigan and beyond.
Every year MSU will bring us some seed pods. We take the seed pods to MSU, they'll harvest the seeds out of the pods, and then they'll grow them in their laboratories or wherever, and then they'll bring back 250 to 300 trees to us to give back to the legislators and to their guests. So every year, depending on how many pods we have going out there, and based on the number of trees coming back to us. But it's pretty neat because everyone takes pods and takes them to give them to friends and family, so they end up all across the state of Michigan, as well as north, south, east, west, and other states. It's pretty a neat, unique tree to have in your growing in your yard.
Yeah.
Unique bark on it. It was planted for fence posts. It's a fast-growing tree.
Okay.
It grows 1 to 2 feet a year. Once it gets established, it'll grow. And they were known for, they were a pretty straight-growing tree, so they were planted for fence posts.
Now this was before the Capitol was here?
About the same time as the Capitol went up.
My brother is the Parks and Recreation Department director in Frankenmuth, and they had trees from Senator Horn. I think he took those up to Frankenmuth, and so it is something that is being spread all over, and obviously it has good genes because you had mentioned how old this was, that it was about the same time the Capitol was built. You have pictures of that.
Yeah.
So
early days, 1879, when the Capitol was dedicated, the early pictures, we should see 2 trees, one on the north side of the sidewalk, one on the south side. So they were there originally, small trees, but they were there in the early photos, and now we still have this majestic tree now currently in our yard. Holding its own, you know, they're going to last about 100 years, and then we figure this is about 130 plus year old tree. So it's well cared for, and we treat it with injections from time to time, keep the,
fertilizer injections and
things like that,
okay.
as well as bugs and things like that.
Now you have a lot of trees on the campus of the Capitol here, on the Capitol grounds. What are some of the things that you do to preserve that? I know you don't allow trucks driving on here, and there's certain places for tents, but what are some of the other precautions you take to protect the trees here on this public space?
We try to keep it, as you said, vehicle traffic off it. Even our mowers, we try to keep them away from the footprint of the root system. The root systems grow out as far as the limbs grow on a tree. So if you look at a typical tree and a wingspan on the limbs, that's how far your root systems grow. And so it's very important to keep that ground from being compacted, and the more or less events you have underneath the trees, the better. So this preserves the root system, keeps them alive. And we try to keep it watered well, which the tree takes a lot of water. You'd think the watering your grass was enough, but sometimes you have to overwater the grass in order to get it down to the roots. And that's one thing I think most homeowners don't understand either, is that you really got to water your lawn heavily in order for your trees to absorb the water.
And be able to last this long, obviously longer than the life expectancy, if you will, normal life expectancy.
Right.
So, Matt, thank you very much. We appreciate it. We appreciate all your efforts here at the Capitol grounds, and especially with this tree, and for talking today about this beautiful landmark here.
Thank you.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed the show. One of the things definitely that we want to make aware to the folks is, number one, the variety of big trees that we have here, the variety of trees in Lansing. And again, we just talked about some of the big trees around town here and on the Capitol. Trees are very important, so we want to make sure that, again, that you're planting them in safe places where they won't get in the way of electrical wires, etc., but also to maintain and take care of those. And one day too, you will have majestic trees just like this.